everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us for this webinar. We'll be talking about dietitian insurance billing. So I'm really excited to get started. Before we jump into our questions, we'll go over our agenda for today. So we have about 50 minutes to an hour to talk over your pre-selected questions. At the end, when we have a little bit extra time, we'll go over a live Q&A. So if at any point during the webinar you experience issues with the audio or with the images, feel free to write that in the chat, and our event manager will be able to help you get things straightened out. And then please feel free to submit questions, and if there's time at the end, we'll address them then. And this, just to give you a little more context on what this webinar will be about, we're going to be talking with my co-host Ingrid here about the basics of billing insurance for dietitians. We will not be talking about specifically how to use SimplePractice to bill insurance. So if you have questions relevant to how to use SimplePractice or your SimplePractice account, please reach out to our customer success team or visit support.simplepractice.com. We have a ton of resources, including live classes that will walk you through how to set everything up in your SimplePractice account. And with that, I'll introduce my co-host. So as I mentioned, we have Ingrid Knight here. She is a registered dietitian. Ingrid is the owner of Ingrid Knight RD and Associates, and is an expert in nutritional counseling as well as insurance reimbursement. She served for the academy and has really awesome credentials, and is a guru in the world of insurance billing for dietitians. So to learn more about Ingrid, visit her website, ingridknightrd.com. And you also have me. So I am a SimplePractice employee. I am a partnership manager. I've been with SimplePractice for about 3.5 years. I have about 5 years of experience working in the healthcare industry, and I also am a former insurance biller. So with that, we'll dive right in. If you are just getting started with insurance, I also invite you to check out the rest of our Ask a Biller series at simplepractice.com/ask-a-biller series. This is where we'll dive into some specific topics. So if your question doesn't get answered today, if you ask something about secondary claims, or if you are a behavioral health clinician that is on this webinar, I recommend checking out the other videos that we have. And after today, a recording of this video will go out to all registrants, and it will also be posted to this page. So take a look. To unlock the videos, you just simply add your email address, and all of those resources are free. I also wanted to point out that we have a free ebook for anyone that is also interested in learning more, just being able to read more about how to get started with insurance billing for dietitians. So to access that, that's completely free. Just visit simplepractice.com/resources. All right, now I will kick it off to Ingrid, and we'll get into our first question. So our first topic, I'm going to turn my video off here, is contracting. So Ingrid, what are the pros and cons to accepting insurance, and how do I get started? It's a question from Rebecca.
Great. Thanks, Maggie, and welcome everyone. I'm going to turn my video off too so I can just keep chatting. So pros and cons to accepting insurance. This is a great question for dietitians and for all different providers. I would say the number one pro is that it's going to increase your business. It allows you to see more patients. And as Maggie said in her profile, she feels strongly that the more we know and the more we are able to accept insurance, the greater our reach for our care. So we will be able to see more patients because we do accept insurance. And the way that it would increase your business is that patients will be able to find you through their insurance listing. So we have quite a few referrals that come just because they found us as an in-network provider. Another benefit to that is that, or it goes along with that, is marketing. The fact that you accept insurance is very attractive to other healthcare providers. I know when we used to do a lot of in-person marketing, that would be the first question that most of the referral coordinators or office managers would ask us: do you accept insurance? They want to know that we're paneled or in network with the same insurances that their patients are, so that we can provide the service usually at no or a lower cost to that patient. In addition to, as I mentioned, the referral sources, you'll also get, because you're on that panel and people are finding you, it's an automatic marketing tool. Another benefit, if we think about it from the insurance side, it really, and from a bigger picture within our profession, it shows our value. It really shows that we are able to provide a service that allows for improved health outcomes. We know there's a lot of research on medical nutrition therapy and the benefits it provides. When we bill insurance, it shows that we are able to provide the service and help to lower the overall healthcare costs. And let me dive a little bit into that just to explain the value that we provide as dietitians. Because we are a mid-level provider, obviously our reimbursement rates and our overall costs are lower than, say, a physician or a higher level provider. So we can spend a good hour, hour and a half with a patient at a lower cost, and perhaps even lower cost than maybe, say, treating the disease through medication management or other physician level services. So we know that our services are at a benefit not only to improve outcomes, but be able to improve outcomes at a lower cost to the insurances and to the healthcare system overall.
And
a side note of taking, yes, Maggie?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. A side note to taking insurance as well is the fact that it really opens up your network. People, not only the physicians and the individual patients will find you. It may be that you're looking at worksite wellness programs, and perhaps they want you to provide medical nutrition therapy to their employees. And the fact that you take their insurance, you might be able to go into a site or maybe a physician's office even and see patients and or see their worksite employees and bill insurance there. So it opens opportunity for future work. So there's lots of pros, a little bit to the cons, certainly, and there are some cons that it does take some time to get started, but I liken it to applying to a job or applying for a job. You might need to create your resume, you need to, send out your resume and apply for jobs, but once you have the job, you're in. So once you're in the insurances, you don't have to do all that work to get started. There is a learning curve to the billing. Hopefully today will help you feel more confident in doing medical nutrition therapy billing and insurance billing. And there is some time that needs to be spent to make sure that your paperwork is in order, your claims are in order, finding out if services are covered or not covered. Obviously a con would be sometimes medical nutrition therapy is not covered. And sometimes if you're going to enroll, the network is closed, meaning that the insurance company is not allowing new providers, particularly registered dietitians, in your area. So there are a few cons there.
And I think that's a really great point, that it's an investment. So it's an investment of your time. But I think the biggest pro from what I take away is that it's a way to expand your reach. So with that, let's understand what do I need to do to get started with accepting insurance? So what are the first steps?
The first steps is really figuring out which insurances do you want to enroll with, and how do you do that? A couple of different ways. You might be doing some marketing in your area and learning that physicians in your area take a large volume of a certain insurance. For example, Blue Cross Blue Shield or Anthem or United Healthcare. You might be marketing to an area that has an older population that takes a lot of Medicare. So you'll find out through your marketing what insurances to get enrolled with. Another area would be if there's some large employers in your area. So what is the demographic of your population? You can actually find the insurance demographics for your state at the state level. So it might say 60% of people are insured by Blue Cross or Anthem or something like that. But you really want to maybe drill it down to your specific geographic area. So, for example, our main office is in Athens, Georgia, where the University of Georgia is. So one of our the largest employers in the county is the University of Georgia, and they take Blue Cross Blue Shield or Anthem. So we know that we would want to be enrolled with them. So once you've figured out who you want to enroll with, you have to find out how to enroll. One of the first steps for most insurances is doing your profile on CAQH. That's Cat Alpha Queen Harry, CAQH website. It's kind of like LinkedIn, or a way that you would post all of your information so that the insurances can go directly to there and pull it. So it'll take some time, but it's just a one-time thing where you're going to put your education and your work history and your demographic stuff. Then you're going to need to go to each insurance's website and find out how to enroll. And they usually just have it either a paper or a link or an application where you would apply. And usually in that application is a place to put your CAQH number, so you don't have to keep putting all that information into each insurance application. For Medicare, you would go to the PECOS website, which is their Medicare enrollment website from CMS, and it's a whole nother application. They do not accept CAQH. For Medicaid is state-based, so you would need to check with each state to see. The other things that you have to be aware of when you're starting with accepted insurance is, as I mentioned, sometimes the networks may be closed. Sometimes you usually don't know that until you actually apply, and then they'll tell you. You want to ask them, should I apply again in a few months? Is there another time where there's an enrollment period where new providers can be enrolled? Sometimes you have to just argue with them and be able to show that there's a lack of care in your area. If there's less than, or if there's no dietitians within 100 miles of that zip code, and you've got clients who want to be seen, that might help you get in network with that closed network. One other point to find out who to enroll with, you would want to perhaps network with other dietitians. Find out what insurances are they taking in your state. Again, reiterating that every insurance is state-based, so you really have to start with the insurances that are allowed to be sold for residents of your state, and that's who you would enroll with.
And
there are, go ahead, Maggie.
One piece of advice that I usually give clinicians that are just getting started out, a mistake that I see a lot of people make is when they just get started, they want to enroll with every single payer. They want to, they get excited and they want to take insurance. They want to take every insurance. I think it's an important note to make is to start out slow. So maybe start out, if you're just brand new to insurance billing, start with 1 or 2 panels and go through that process first before biting off more than you're ready to chew. It's just, trying to enroll with 5 or 6 payers at one time may become a bigger time commitment than you were expecting, may be a lot more paperwork than you were anticipating, and it may be more than you need to do. So that's a really good point, Ingrid, about looking at the employers in your area and finding out what your clients are actually covered by and work within that insurance frame.
Thanks, Maggie. I totally agree. It can be overwhelming. But definitely a couple of things when you're getting started to be thinking about what will you need. Again, kind of like your resume, you're going to need something that you'll be able to show your work history, your education history that will probably include dates. So you'll need to look at the specific years and dates and what certificates you have. You do need proof of liability insurance. Most, if not all, insurances require that you as a healthcare provider have liability insurance. So you'll need to have that MOI or memorandum of insurance handy. Your license, if you're a licensure state, you'll need a copy of that. Anything else that you can think of off the top of your head, Maggie?
Just time. You'll need to set aside some time.
Set some time.
But otherwise, I think that's a great point, and we can move on to our next question, which is, can I see patients in different states if I'm contracted with insurances in my main office?
I hear this question a lot, and let me reiterate that this is a licensure question and not a insurance question, and we'll talk about both. Every state, under the national constitution, every state has a right to govern their own residents, and therefore they have a right to provide or not provide licensure for their healthcare providers. So that's why every state is different. So if a state has licensure and the person is a resident of that state, then the dietitian needs to have a license in order to provide medical nutrition therapy, and that's specifically what we're talking about. So the question is, if the patient is in a different state, you need to look at the licensure of that state. Now, if the patient physically comes to your office, which say, for example, we're in Georgia and a patient lives in South Carolina, but they're coming physically to our office, that's fine. They can be seen in Georgia. But if they're staying in South Carolina and we're seeing them via telehealth, we need to be licensed in South Carolina because South Carolina has licensure, and we are. So we can see those patients. So this is a licensure issue. How the person pays, meaning whether they pay cash or they use their insurance, does not change the fact that states have or do not have license, and each state has to be looked at. So this has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Now, when you talk about contracting insurances by your main office, this is a good point. You always bill to your local. So if I'm seeing that patient in South Carolina, or a dietitian who is licensed in South Carolina is seeing her, she's part of our group. And let's say that person has Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina policy. Well, we're enrolled with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia. We bill to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia. So in SimplePractice, you'll see where it says insurance, it has the member ID. We put the member ID in there, but the name of the insurance that we send it to, meaning who we bill, will be Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia. And that's true of all insurances. I think I answered that one. Hopefully answer what they were looking for.
Yeah, always bill to who you're credentialed to. And we'll get into more of that right now in terms of tips that you need for billing and making sure that you're always sending the right things to the right places. So let's get into our fourth question. What CPT codes do our DNs bill? And CPT code, for anyone that's new to the whole world of acronyms, is current procedural terminology code. That's how we define the service. So on a claim, that is the numeric code. It's usually 5 digits that tells the insurance what you did with your client. And
great. And Maggie, if you want to go to thank you. Just go to the next. That was a great way of putting it, and I appreciate this question, as I know we have quite a few therapists or behavioral health professionals on the call, and welcome, and I'm so glad you're here and you're excited about working with registered dietitian nutritionists. These are the main CPT codes that we bill. As Maggie mentioned, the CPT code reflects what we do. So we always bill for the service that we are providing, and a majority of the time, registered dietitian nutritionists are providing medical nutrition therapy. And so here's the descriptions. These MNT codes are billed by time and by unit. Even though it says each 15 minutes, there is a range, and certainly you can look that up on the CMS website or find out more information. So if I pull up my own little notes, it's something like 8 to 20, or I can't remember the exact number of minutes, but we'll get more into what you need for billing. So point is, they're billed by units, and so it's time-based. The 97802 is for the first visit or the initial assessment. And then I would say mostly we use 97802 and 97803. Of course, there are some people who are using 97804. You'll know that this is per unit for a 30-minute, and this is 2 or more in a group therapy. The reimbursement rates for these, we can look up. The Medicare rates are published, but contract rates for insurances is private, so we can't really discuss what that rate is. But again, note that it's a 15-minute. So for example, in Georgia, the Medicare rate is around $30 for a unit. So that would translate to about $120 for an hour for initial, and then the reassessment is a little bit less. And then, of course, the 97804 is going to be lower because it's based on multiple patients. So recognizing that if we have a group, you know, the rate for that unit is going to be low. It's going to be lower. So these are the main codes. And I just want to read off something that I kind of wrote and pulled from some other information, because I want to always reiterate, every healthcare provider will bill the service that they are providing, and that is in their scope of practice, and that is, they are contracted to provide. So let me break that down. When we're providing medical nutrition therapy, this is what we bill. And there's certainly more, you know, extensive definition of medical nutrition therapy. And it needs to be within our scope of practice. So there are lots and lots of CPT codes out there, but if it's not in our scope to say, do a lab or do some, you know, it's not necessarily in our scope to provide behavioral therapy because we're not trained to do that, then that is not something that we would bill for. The third piece of that is that what are we contracted to provide? When you enroll with your insurances, you will have a fee schedule, and that will tell you what the reimbursement rates are for your codes. If you have to make sure that you're contracted to provide those services as well. I do want to mention Incident 2 billing. There may be some different codes. Incident 2 means that usually a physician is doing the bill, like you're working within a physician's office, and the billing company or the billing, you know, office is billing under the physician, but a lower level provider is providing the service. So there are some other CPT codes that can be billed Incident 2, but that's kind of a whole nother discussion. And so we're really just focusing on what dietitians can bill directly as part of their scope of practice.
All right. Should we move on to our next question?
Yes.
All right. So for our fifth question, how will I know if my client has coverage to see an RD?
Good question. The short answer is someone needs to call. I watched Barbara's presentation on how to deal with denials, her SimplePractice Ask the Biller presentation, and she had the same statement for therapists. So I was kind of glad to see that we're not the only one. It's not something that's blanketed covered. Not every plan, not every insurance covers medical nutrition therapy. So there's really no way of looking at a national insurance policy and assuming that everyone who has that insurance will be covered the same way. For example, United Healthcare has a national preventive policy. And in it, it states that medical nutrition therapy, and it has very specific, how it's covered. Well, we can't assume that all United Healthcare policies have that, because some might be self-funded, meaning that they don't have to follow the national guidelines, and they kind of pick and choose what services might be covered. So MNT, or medical nutrition therapy, may be an exclusion. And for most patients, we're really not going to know unless someone calls. Well, and again, I say call because there's usually not a good way, or even on the insurance's portal, a way to look up MNT codes, unfortunately. Now, how you do that is really up to you. And I work with a lot of different dietitians in my private practice mentoring program and doing insurance enrollments and billing training. And I would say that's different ways of doing it, but there's probably one or two. Either the provider's office, meaning you or your provider's office, is going to call and verify the coverage for the patient, or you're going to put it on the client to do so, and they would probably need to call to verify. There's lots of little details that we need to know when we're calling to verify. So I've provided, tips.
Perfect segue to our next question.
One of the things that we're going to offer you guys is a verification of benefits form that you or your clients can use to verify if medical nutrition therapy is going to be covered. And you've got my contact information here. If you go to my website too, there's also a contact me form. Just reach out to me and I'll be glad to send over that form, because this has all the details where you can kind of fill in the blanks and making sure that you're asking all the very specific questions about medical nutrition therapy. Because sometimes it can be covered as a preventive service, sometimes it's covered as medical. And even when it's covered, that's where clients especially would get it confused. They'll say, well, you're in network. And I'll say, well, we're in network. That's great. And that helps. But we need to know that our specific service is covered. Okay, that's great. It's covered. How is it covered? Does it apply to the deductible? Is there a copay? Is it covered at 100%? Honestly, my blanket statement when I speak to patients and other healthcare providers who are interested in referring to us is that most, if not many, policies cover our services at 100% as a preventive service, which is great. That's really due to the Affordable Care Act. And if any policies go by the Affordable Care Act, they have to go by the recommendation that medical nutrition therapy is covered. So usually they'll cover it at 100% for preventive. But again, we have to drill down to what does that mean? Are there visit limits? There are some policies that only allow 3 visits a year. And for us, a visit is the one time, like say the one date of service that we're covering 97802, and then the one date of service we're covering 97803, et cetera, not necessarily the number of units. So like they could be seen for 3 separate visits and then that's all they get for the year. Sometimes it's based on the diagnosis code. So we want to be able to gather that information before we verify the benefits to say, okay, this patient isn't overweight or obese, but they have celiac disease. Is celiac disease covered? Well, it might be covered differently than, say, if they were overweight or obese. So a lot of nuances there to be looking for. So you want to be able to call, or somebody should be able to call to verify the coverage. I do want to mention eating disorders here, because there was a question about, are eating disorders, are they mental health, and are they covered under parity laws? And I didn't put that up as a question, but I wanted to tie it back into the verification of benefits here. That is a state-based situation, so I can't answer that off the top of my head. It would be dependent on if the state has a parity law, meaning that mental health benefits also are covered as a medical treatment, if that makes sense, so that dietitian services would be covered if the person is receiving treatment as for a behavioral health issue. It's state-based, and then you have to watch the self-funded plans, because even if there's a state law, the self-funded plans can do what they choose to do, so they don't necessarily have to go by those guidelines. So whether eating disorders is covered or not, again, it really just depends on the benefit and the policy. I did want to mention here too. Go ahead, Maggie.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm so glad that we're able to offer this resource. Verification of benefits really is the cornerstone for success in insurance billing. That if you do that, if you put that extra work in ahead of time, you are really guaranteed no surprises at the end. And if there are surprises, they're usually easier to resolve, since you have followed the thorough steps of calling and making sure that you check all of the boxes before you submit a claim out, before you agree to start treating a client. And I know that it's more work to do up front, but it will save you time in the long run. And so my tips are to block off time in your calendar for verification of benefits, and also try to pick the middle of the week to call. It's the slowest time for the insurance companies. You're going to find your busiest days are Monday morning, and later in the afternoon is usually a better time to call. If you're on the East Coast, early in the morning is good, because you're not getting all your West Coast people in. And if you're on the West Coast, later in the afternoon, you miss out on all that East Coast call traffic. So I think that this is really, really important, and everyone should have a system. And if you don't have the time to commit to verifying benefits, that's when you need to decide, is it time to hire someone to help out with this, or is it time to go cash-based, because this is super, super, super important.
That's right. It really can save a lot of time and effort in the long run. A couple of things, and it's not Exactly, and I realized I missed this when we were talking about the CPT codes, but it made me think about it when someone was asking about eating disorders, and I started talking about state-based. Someone also asked if we could order labs and bill for that, and so two things there. Again, it's state-based. If it's in the scope of practice for dietitians to order labs, that is a state law or rule, so you'll have to look at your state. And no, we couldn't bill for that because again, that's not in our scope to do labs, so to speak. So we wouldn't bill for a lab service. I believe that was the way that the question was asking about that. But yeah, reach out to me and get this verification benefit form. Again, we can pass that along to the patients and or do that in-house.
All right, so our next question on the topic of billing, what diagnosis codes are covered for registered dietitian nutritionist services?
This can be all over the place, which diagnosis code. So again, we go back to that. So important to verify the benefits. I like to sort of categorize diagnosis codes. However, this is not an official categorization, but we sort of think about diagnosis codes in the dietitian world as preventive or medical. So preventive codes might be the Z71.3, which is nutrition, surveillance, and counseling, or perhaps sometimes the insurances consider a BMI code to be a preventive code, and that would be a Z68, and then the extension is based on the patient's BMI. Those are two things that we can actually list as a diagnosis and make that quote-unquote diagnosis. That is within our scope. However, it is not in our scope to diagnose obesity. It is not in our scope to diagnose cardiovascular disease or hypertension or hyperlipidemia. So even if we see high cholesterol on a lab, we cannot put high cholesterol code on the claim unless we have the medical record where the diagnosis was given by a physician or other qualified healthcare provider. I hope that makes sense. So we cannot create the diagnosis or the diagnosis code based on information. We have to have a record or a medical chart that states that that patient has that diagnosis. So those are, and so then we move into what I consider more medical codes. So like I mentioned, celiac disease or eating disorders or the hyperlipidemia or renal disease. Those are usually considered more of a medical diagnosis. And when we talk about coverage, may be covered differently per the insurance.
And so that's a perfect segue into our next question, which is, does my client need a referral from the doctor in order to be covered?
Short answer is usually no, but it depends on the policy. For Medicare, we always need a referral or doctor's order stating that the patient has diabetes or kidney disease, because when we're providing MNT directly, as we just described earlier, Medicare only covers kidney disease and diabetes, and they require us to have a referral, and we put the referring physician's name and NPI on the claim. For other insurances, usually private insurances, sometimes they will say a referral or a doctor's order is required. Most of the time it is not required. However, consider what we just mentioned prior. What diagnosis are you going to be able to put on the insurance? And even a bigger clinical picture, in my opinion, it helps to have the referral, the most recent visit notes and labs, because it's going to help the dietitian better serve the patient.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. So we're going to switch gears here a little bit to a very relevant topic, which is, how do I bill telehealth as an RD? And are there any tips that you can give for avoiding telehealth rejections?
Sure. So billing telehealth as an RD is really the same as billing telehealth for any medical provider, you know, that's in the situation where we consider outpatient or private practice. So it really depends. Every insurance is different how they want it coded. Most insurances at this point have that pretty loud and clear on their website, and it may drill down to your state. For example, Blue Cross and Anthem are state-based, so I'll have to go to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia's website to find out what their telehealth policy is, and usually it says in there what place of service and or modifier they want us to use. The CPT code is the same as if the person were in person. Why? Because we're providing the same service. It would just be that the place of service and or modifier might be different. So I would go to the insurance's website to see what they say. Part of your verification of benefits could be that you ask, is telehealth covered? Is this service covered as telehealth? And how do I code for that? They should be able to tell you. Doing all of that before you submit the claim should help you avoid the telehealth rejections. Unfortunately, these things are rather fluid, and I know if you're like me, we've had a few rejections with the new year and things changing, and we're able to correct that claim and resend it right back pretty easily with SimplePractice. Often the question is, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, we get a lot of questions about what codes to use. And I think that's a really good point, is the service does not change. So the CPT code is going to be exactly the same. It's really just some things that you need to modify on the claim, for lack of better words.
Right.
Adding specific codes to just show them that where the video or how the session took place, and that was a video call.
Exactly. And usually we'll get either the rejection that says right away your place of service was wrong, or sometimes we've been getting denials that'll say your place of service was wrong. And so we either have to call to find out what they want or just send in the corrected claim. A lot of people ask, will telehealth coverage be permanent? Well, let me back up and say that we've been doing telehealth for almost 6 years in our office. So it's not like it wasn't there before, which is great. It just didn't have as much coverage. So we were doing the same thing where we would say, okay, is this service covered as telehealth? Can we provide that? Now the coverage has expanded, which is great. We certainly hope that most policies will be permanent. All I can tell you is right now for Medicare, as long as there is a public health emergency, which is renewed every 90 days, Medicare will cover the service. Our services is telehealth. And that part of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and others are really advocating for permanent telehealth, specifically through Medicare, because if Medicare is sometimes the standard. If they do it, then hopefully the other insurances. But right now, we're looking at it, generally speaking, that it's being covered during the public health emergency. And like I said, as in past, it really has been covered for quite a few policies. So I would say don't give up. It's not going to, I don't believe it's going to be temporary, but it's hard to say, what's going to happen. The other thing I want to mention is part of billing telehealth that you're using, a HIPAA compliant platform like SimplePractice for your telehealth service. While that is not necessary right now, again, CMS Medicare said we can use other non-HIPAA compliant platforms. It's probably a good idea to go ahead and make sure you're on track to use, because we don't think that is going to be permanent. We think that using a HIPAA compliant telehealth video platform will be beneficial overall, and that will be something that will be required by all healthcare providers going forward.
And also a really great practice just to have something that is protecting your client's privacy. All right. So our next question is, what documentation do I need for billing insurance?
Couple of different, I'm going to break this down into two sections. One is like, what do you need to actually file the claim? So you're going to need, the patient's name and their date of birth and their address, and obviously, and some signed forms, which SimplePractice provides, your templates for that says, yes, we can bill your insurance. So you need that sort of documentation ahead of time. But I think I get this question a lot where clinicians, in particular registered dietitian nutritionists, there's a perception that your charting needs to be different. And honestly, my opinion and what we've learned from the standard is that your charting is the same no matter where in what role you are working and how the patient is paying. Again, if you're providing medical nutrition therapy, you chart the way that you know is best practice. So whether that's an ADIME note or a SOAP note or just, notes that you're keeping in a secure place, as long as you're able to provide a progress note and a statement of what you did. So your notes should be reflecting the CPT code. You should be able to show that you provided the service that you billed. Part of that, though, the one big thing that I do tell all clinicians, all dietitians in particular, because our service is billed for face-to-face time only, be sure to document your time in and time out of the face-to-face time with the patient. And this question did come up. Can I bill for time that I'm charting and doing other things outside of the visit? The answer is no. Our M&T codes are valued so that they pay well enough to consider the time that you spend outside of the visit, but you only get reimbursed for the face-to-face time.
All right. And further along the claim journey, so we've understood how to actually put the claim together. And now let's talk about payments and what happens after the services take place. So our next question is, how do I submit claims and where can I see the claim status?
So as long as you have that documentation, you've told SimplePractice in the appointment, how much time you spent with a patient. If you try to create a claim and you don't have the diagnosis in there, it's going to tell you, which is great. It says there's no diagnosis code, please put one in. So as we mentioned before, you need to have the documentation that backs up what your diagnosis is. And so you put that in, then you're just going to create a claim. I know, as Maggie mentioned, there's videos and instructions on how to create a claim in SimplePractice. And then once it's created, you actually submit it. Once it's submitted, you'll see the different stages of what I consider status. It says like prepared, submitted. Maggie, maybe make sure I'm giving the right words. Accepted, yep. Accepted by the insurance,
and
or
most
rejected.
Paid.
And paid, yes. So at the end, you'll get the paid or the denied or the deductible. And so that's where you click on that, and then you'll be able to see the claim status within SimplePractice. Just like it's not going to have, it may not have all of the details on there. You might have to go to the insurance website or go to Availity or somewhere else to see the patient's benefits or something, more specific, but this claim status will be in SimplePractice. Now, if you've done all that great stuff of verifying benefits and making sure you have the right documentation, as Maggie said, we're hopeful that it will say paid and everything went through fine.
And important to note, when you're getting paid from the insurance, that part will go either directly to you through your bank account, through a direct deposit from the payer, or through a check in the mail. Your payments aren't processed by your EHR, by SimplePractice in any way. So those payments, you'll work with the insurance company to set up how you preferred to receive your reimbursements. And like I said, that will either be.
You want to know where the money is. Yes, yeah. Where the money is specifically.
And it's really important to check your claim status against what is actually in your account. I think that's important to note, is just when you see that paid status, make sure that it matches what is on the check or what is in the direct deposit that you receive from the insurance company.
I think that's a good point, because you do want to look at it closely to see if there is any patient responsibility, because sometimes it can show up as, say, paid $200, but really like the literal payment was $180 and the patient owed a $20 copay. So yeah, be sure to look at the claim status closely to see if there's any differences with the actual money.
Yes, definitely. All right. And then our next question, this is our last question of the pre-selecteds, is what can I do now to get my notes in a better place in case they are ever requested for an audit?
This is a great question, and I hopefully addressed it a little bit on the last question about, or the 2 questions ago about what documentation do I need for billing. Your chart should be, again, however you would chart in a clinical setting, that you should have, as much data, again, based on the service that you provided. And I like to mention, and again, this is just my experience, it's an audit sounds really scary, and it really isn't an audit. What we have is a request for medical records or documentation. So they'll send over, for example, we had one recently that said we need the medical documentation, and they make it sound very broad, like they want labs and notes and tests and everything for this patient for all visits in 2020. Well, we're not a physician, so we're only going to be able to provide what we did. So we have, we can certainly make a progress note based on what's in SimplePractice, or we are able to provide a summary progress note for all of the visits. Again, stating specifically what we did to match up with the service that we built. So that's what we submit to insurance. If we do have a referral from a physician, we may submit that, or perhaps the client has provided labs or something else. But we are not expected to provide a full medical history because that's not within our scope. So we just provide what we did related to the dates of service, because they will specifically ask for dates of service for that patient.
And I think that's a good point of thinking about what's in your scope. And we've talked about that a lot throughout, but it's really important to just reflect your services, what you did, and what you're there for your client. All right, and so that's the wrap for our pre-selected questions. We're going to have some time for an open Q&A. Wanted to advise everyone of some webinars that we have coming up. So at the end of the month, we have one of our Ask the Expert webinars, an interdisciplinary look at stroke rehab, where we'll have an SLP, an OT, and a behavioral health professional. And then we'll also have another Ask the Biller webinar happening in March, where we're taking a deep dive look at joining insurance networks with Barbara Griswold, who is an LMFT, but that will be a pretty general overview of joining insurance networks. And then we'll have another Ask the Experts topic on working with couples. All right, so now, without further ado, we can get to some of the questions from our attendees here. So Bob asks if we can talk, can Ingrid comment on super bills and how those could help a practice who is out of network or does not work with any insurance? And I could comment on this as well. So a super bill is what we'll hand to a client who is cash pay or is not working, their insurance is not accepted by the practice. So it's up to you how you would want to handle that. If you would want to bill them up front and then have them submit the super bill to insurance for reimbursement. Ingrid, do you have any out-of-network clients in your practice?
That's a good question. I don't think we do. But beautifully, we have become in network with most of the insurances. But yes, we have provided super bills in the past, and I have to say kudos to SimplePractice because it's super easy to create. It's going to include basically the same information that would be on a claim. So if you're able to see a claim or even look at that verification of benefit sheets that I gave, you're going to want the CPT codes, you're going to want the time in and time out spent so you can tell them how many units and then the full amount charged. So as long as you're descriptive in what the service is that you provided, that should be plenty for the patient to take to provide to their for network benefits. The SimplePractice will autofill your business name and your tax ID because they're going to need that as well. They're going to need the provider's name and their NPI. Again, all of that is autofilled on the super bill when you create it in SimplePractice. But there's really no, and of course you're going to want to put the diagnosis code, but again, you need to make sure it's based on their medical chart or if it's a diagnosis that you can provide within your scope. There's no magic bullet to make it covered. It's kind of like our service, it's either going to be covered or not. And honestly, most policies I've found that they don't usually have much out of network benefits for medical nutrition therapy. And if they do, it usually applies to a deductible, and oftentimes it's a separate deductible than their main deductible. So it's like an out-of-network deductible. So it's like really high. But you know what? If the patient is using a lot of services like that, it really could help them that you provide that super bill and they're able to get that amount applied to their deductible. The other thing is I would think they could use that potentially by using, if they're using their health savings account for your services.
Yes, I think when working with out-of-network clients, it's really important to set expectations. So not making any guarantees that they're going to receive reimbursement, not making any guarantees that they have coverage. So it's the same system of if you are going to verify that benefit for them, to take those steps that we mentioned at the top, or have your client make sure they understand what their out-of-network benefits are. It can be confusing for them. It can be a little overwhelming. So I would just make sure that you have that conversation up front and not set, like Ingrid said, it's not a magic fix. So the super bill does not indicate that they will get money back. So just make sure that they understand the out-of-network benefits. All right, so another question from Tabitha. Do you find it better to verify benefits or have the client do it as a solo practitioner?
You're going to find that a different answer depending on who you ask. In my experience, I like that we do that for our clients and particularly for our clinicians. So there's pros and cons to both. The pro would be that it provides a service for the patient, and to me, it provides a service to the clinician. So when the clinician is seeing the patient, they don't feel like they're worried. Like I feel like we've given the patient all the information we can, and if we for some reason are not able to verify the benefit, we do give that to them and say, look, we weren't able to get a hold of anyone or they weren't able to confirm. Here's the information if you want to confirm. Otherwise, it's going to be out of pocket, and here's how much it's going to cost. We like to be very upfront with all of that information ahead of time. On the other side, I have found that there are lots of dietitians who like that we get the patient to do it. Obviously, it takes off some of the stress and burden on the clinician's office, but it really empowers the patient to look at their health care and their health benefits. And perhaps even advocate for the service. If it's not covered, is there something more that they could do to get a pre-authorization where it might be covered one or two times? So I definitely see both sides of it.
I recommend a combination. I think it's helpful to recommend that your client do it themselves for that reason of being able to understand, and so that they're not surprised when they find out that they have a deductible and so they have to pay $100, or there are no surprises for them. They have a clear understanding of what is expected. But on the other side, if this information is confusing to you, imagine that it's very confusing to someone who is not in the healthcare field, who does not, who isn't frequently around these acronyms, or is super familiar with the process of insurance billing and what it means when something has to, when you have a CPT and an ICD-10 and all those different verbiage. It can be easier when that's part of your workflow and when you build that into your practice.
Yes.
All right, and then another person asked, how do I bill if there is a deductible? And I know that word strikes fear in a lot of people, or confusion, so I think it'd be good to clear up. What is a deductible?
Well, you're going to bill the same. I think the question is, you're going to bill the same. I guess it's probably meaning like, what do you collect at the time of service?
Hmm.
And it's hard because we might bill 5 units. Do we collect a 4-unit rate? I'm not sure I know the right answer to that, but I think it just kind of depends on what your policies are. If your policy states we're going to bill you for the amount after, I think that's probably the best practice, because that way you're billing them for the actual service that you provided, the time, and it's based on your contract rate. So I'm just going to back up real quick and say, in case people don't know, you bill to the insurance per unit your usual and customary rate. You need to decide what that is. So if it's $40 a unit or $50 a unit or $100, whatever that is, you bill that to the insurance. You're only going to get back what you're contracted. So as I mentioned, Medicare in Georgia is around $30 a unit. So I could bill $1,000 for an hour, but I'm only going to get 120 back. And so in using that example, if it were to apply to the deductible, the amount applied to the deductible is the contract rate. So in that example, 120 would apply to the deductible, and that would be the patient responsibility. So we keep a credit card on file when the patient signs up for their appointment, and we have it in our policies that if there is a patient responsibility, we'll charge that card. And so that's what we could do on the other hand. And it will come back in the EOB, in the ERA, in the claim status. It'll say patient responsibility, and it'll show up on your little sidebar of that patient that they have a balance due.
And that's a really good point about making sure that you bill your full rate, your usual and customary rate. That we get that question a lot. Do I just bill the contracted rate? The reason why it's important to bill your usual and customary rate is when you're working with insurance panels for a while and you're up for an increase in your contracted rate, they're going to look at how much your usual and customary rate is. They're going to base that on how much they pay providers in your area. That's the data that they pull. And so it's important for them to see that, for them to calculate that amount that they're writing off, and then for consideration in the future if you do choose to raise your rates or ask them to increase your contracted rate. That usually happens after a few years of working with an insurance company. All right, someone asked, let's see. Chelsea asks, are there a minimum or maximum number of units that you can bill per visit?
Great question. In general, it's 8, but it depends on the insurance. I know Medicare, which again is kind of our standard, will allow us to bill up to 8 units per visit. That's 2 hours generally. And for most of our insurances, they've allowed that as well. Some of them it's like 4, so it would just be an hour. It really depends on the insurance.
All right, and we'll see if we can fit. We have 2 minutes left, so we'll take another question. Julie asks, what is the difference between nutrition and coaching and MNT? I think coaching can cross borders, part of the question.
That's a great question. And I would direct you to the Academy of Nutrition's website, because they have some excellent resources, which I believe are public, that have the descriptions. So I don't want to say out loud unless I was reading it, because I feel like their description is very well said. And so we mentioned, you saw the description for CBT code MNT. There's actually a definition of medical nutrition therapy, and it's pretty long. And if that person would send me, I can send them the wording on that, because I have it saved in a file. We didn't put it on a slide today, of the MNT, and direct you to where the nutrition coaching and counseling pieces. Those are the definitions from a national standpoint. Let me go down to the fact and say that even there are some within the licensure laws at each state. That's why, again, it is so important to look at each state of the residents of the patient that you're seeing, because they have usually in their licensure law what it means to provide MNT versus something else. Because they may even have rules about providing health coaching or nutrition counseling. I mean, they're all very specific. So it's a great question. And there are some specific definitions of them. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
All right, and then we'll wrap up with one last question, which is what resources would you recommend to get up to speed with ICD-10 codes, CPT codes, and ways to get started with taking insurance?
Ooh, good question. Well, certainly, if you're getting started, I would make a decision if you want to do this on your own or if you want to pay someone else to do it. As I mentioned before, it's kind of like applying for a job. You do it with the enrollment with insurances is a one-time thing. We don't all need to be experts on that, and we can have somebody else do that. And I full disclosure, I offer that service. But if you want to do it on your own, starting with the CAQH application, as I mentioned, those steps, like figure out which insurances you want to roll with, and then go to CAQH and then find out what they require for enrolling. And then the billing piece, again, do you want to do it on your own and take that deep dive into learning about it? Then there's lots of training materials. The only thing I can tell you as far as like public information is definitely the Academy of Nutrition's website. And I will say their telehealth stuff right now is open to non-members too. So everybody can look at that. And it talks about CPT codes and billing. But I'll find that a lot of it is once you start getting into it and you get that experience under your belt, it becomes easier. So again, if you want to do it on your own, and as Maggie mentioned, if it's something that you don't want to do on your own, hire out, because you can hire somebody to do the verification, everything from verification to finally I got paid, and you don't have to do any of it. So that's a great question, and definitely just get started. I think one of those things is like people worry about what handouts am I going to have, and where am I going to see patients and all that stuff. I say just jump in. Just go ahead and get started, enroll with some insurances, do some marketing, get started somewhere, and you'll find that your business will start to build.
All right. And again, we have Ingrid's verification of benefits form here. I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar as well, we have SimplePractice has an ebook all about getting started with insurance for specifically for dietitians. So to access that, you can go to simplepractice.com/resources. And then I highly recommend always using a verification of benefits form script. So reach out to Ingrid for that, and that's free for anyone that attended today's webinar. And then we also have another library of resources here from our previous Ask a Biller webinars that are free and available online, simplepractice.com/askabiller series. And then as a special offer for everyone that attended today's webinar who is new to SimplePractice, you are eligible to get your first 2 months free. So you'll see that information. You'll see a link to sign up in today's follow-up email. So definitely recommend for anyone that's just getting started with SimplePractice, or anyone that's just getting started with insurance billing or just new to private practice, make it really easy, and there's a ton of resources to help you through the whole process. And then if you are someone that's already using SimplePractice and you know someone that could benefit from it, we have a Give 50, Get 50 program. So for questions about how to use that referral link, visit support.simplepractice.com and find out how you can refer your friends. And thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out of your day. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for taking time to present with us.
Thanks, Maggie. I appreciate you and SimplePractice hosting.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.